Of having Alexandra Angeletaki of Trondheim here with us. Alexandra's background is archaeology, and having taken a master's degree from the University of Oslo in 1996 about the burial customs in Santorini during the Archaic period, she worked as a field archaeologist for the Greek Euphorate of Antiquities in Greece between 1982 and 2000. She did excavations in several locations and museum registration work in Delos, Paros, Samos, and Santorini. Until 2006, she worked as a lecturer for archaeology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, teaching courses on classical archaeology, European archaeology, archaeological theory, and cultural history. Since 2006, she has been working in different projects in order to promote the historical archives of their library and its digital resources. Currently, she is Senior Research Librarian at the University Library of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. She works with digital educational design and serves as project manager at the library. She also teaches information literacy for archaeology and museum studies students and researchers. The title of her presentation today is How is the use of virtual reality technology challenging the museum library sector? In the case of the University Museum and Library of Trondheim, Norway. Alexandra, the floor is all yours.
So, thank you very much. This is really a little bit intimidating after Harvard and Stanford. Here I come from Trondheim. But I will take the challenge and I try to present the work I've done. It's been a long way. To start from archaeology, excavating in different islands and different sites, over to the digital world. I had to learn a lot, and I'm really glad that we have this opportunity, and I'm really thankful to the organizers for inviting me, especially Evelyn that organized the whole thing, and Charlie. Thank you very much, and Andrea that did the practical part. I was really impressed that the academy here had a Center for Digital Humanities, because at the place I work now, it's also part of an academy, and it's going to take a few years before our academy can actually say that they're going to introduce the digital element. Now, what you're looking at here, it's something that we're holding in the library of NTNU, which is the University of Trondheim. Among the rare books that we have in that library, we have a lot of manuscripts, fragments, we have pictures, special collections. It's all the memory of the region and of the country. So when I started working there in 2006, I realized that even though I was working at the museum and the academy, which was connected to that library, I knew very little about the library itself. And I was wondering why. So I used my job the first 2 years to think as a user, not as a staff member. And I was wondering what is that we can do to create more engagement, because if we don't create more engagement, people will forget about us. So we played early with these kind of illustrations. We created workshops for students to come and work with books from the 1500s and 1600s. This is a book written by Adam Lonicher about distillation. He was a doctor in Maine, if I say it right, and he published that book, which was of 700 pages about distillation. And he went around this area and he gathered all kind of medicinal distillation recipes, so that, as he says, the poor people could get that accessible to them. So we started with this book, which was fragile and very difficult to handle. We couldn't allow people to see the book. So we thought, okay, what if we use a digital tool to give some of that knowledge that the book has inside it? And that's when all the questions started. Now I have to, it's not working. So, maybe I can, sorry, on that here. So, I've been working since 2011 with digital tools, and always my background was how can we use those tools to challenge the way that we think as the ones that work with that. Very often we forget our users. That's the idea I got when I started working at the library. I felt like we were very often talking about what people want from us without really asking them. So that, I thought, it was one of the main challenges we had to change. And just because that library was visited by scientists mostly and students secondly, I was thinking, what happens when this generation passes away? What happens, how are we going to reach the younger people, the younger generations? So I started working with students, and in order to work with students, I had to have several questions, and these questions were coming, of course, from my archaeological background, because I'm interested in the past, but I'm also interested in what does the past constitute of. Is it just the authorities, the ones that come from the museums and the libraries that can have a narrative on the user, or is it the user that understands the past by himself that can contribute to that, or both? So there's a long way from what constituted all of these museums when they started off in the 18th century as rarity cabinets, where people were collecting both naturalia and archaeological objects. And there were people that were interested into studying those objects, and they also allowed people to come and visit, the regular people. There's a long way from that to the way that we use technology today as an open access tool, and the way that we allow knowledge float into our society. I think that's one of the most important things, how open we are now in relationship to the knowledge that was back then. And technology has created new paths for scientists, but also for the public. It's not just the scientists themselves that have to find new ways to operate with technology. It's also the audience that has to keep up with what is changing in technology. one of the main theorists when it comes to museology is Schopper, and she sees museums and archive generally, the sector of that, she sees that as an educational institution. But she really reflects on the idea of who is the expert, what would be the message for the audience. Because when you analyze the interaction between the objects themselves that one has in a museum or in an archive, then they actually have their own life. And they have their own life from the time that one contemplates the object as a user, as a visitor. It creates a kind of thoughts. It creates a kind of reflection inside your own head, which you take with you after you've left the museum or after you've left a digital collection that you have visited. It's the same wherever that is. So is the scholarly knowledge about the past now something that is presented as it used to be? If we compare with the centuries that have gone by, is there a big change that the technology has brought? So, what do we do in digital humanities? We try to create knowledge, we try to design knowledge activities and develop projects, but we require team collaboration, and it has to be very often from different backgrounds, with different terminologies, with different ways of thinking. So in the first project that we used virtual reality, we had this idea of giving a digital object a new life in a way, instead of just digitalizing a book and creating a flat copy of it, but still digital, to create an augmented book, which would have a lot of different qualities. And in order to do that, we needed experts. So we went out in the universities, in the networks that we had, and we found Percro, a robotics lab, which is a 3D lab that works in Italy. Their base is in Pisa, but they have very many international projects, and they collaborate with a lot of people around the world. And they have one of the most recent technologies when it comes to virtual reality. So we picked experts from there. The technologists were from there. We had a chemistry expert that was a chemistry student. He worked with history of chemistry because we needed that. We were not able to know what kind of material, for example, the drawings of the particular book that we were going to work were made out of. Were they made out of glass? Were they made out of bronze? What was the material itself? So all of that, going back to 15, 16, 90, we had to have an expert to relate to that. And as we started with user content workshops where the users could actually participate in different workshops and give us feedback along the way of how we would recreate that environment and if that would be interesting for them. So we approached high school classes and tried to have them as the focus group of our experiment. Because it's one thing what we think might be important or interesting for them, and it was a totally different thing what they thought was interesting and important. And of course we had to have designers and artists to help us transcribe the illustrations from the old books to the 3D environment, because that could not be done by the IT people. It was very difficult because they had no idea of how to recreate the atmosphere of that period. And we ended up to actually reconstruct the actual oven and all the equipment by craftsmen at our university, because we had to actually see the physical procedure of it, because it was not enough with the digital. And that was really challenging, because we had to reproduce everything the way that it was. So the products of that particular project was that we wanted to reconstruct the atmosphere of an alchemist lab based on the illustrations of the books that we had in our library, and allow the students to play a game in there. Actually, we have that right now in the back of the room. You can actually put the Oculus glasses on and go into that particular alchemist lab from 1569 and look around and see how it looks, and you can actually perform an experiment. And this transcription had to be done by the artists. We had to put color, we had to talk with the chemistry expert to see what kind of materials and how the whole atmosphere would be. And that took pretty long time, almost 2 years, to work with that. I'm not going to refer to the money that we had to use for all that, because at that time virtual technology was in its beginning. And what we created for the first was a book that had, as one said, pop-ups for grown-ups. So that was the drawings would come out of the book as 3D objects, and you would also have audios and the text. The text itself was actually one of the main challenges, because it was written in fracture, it's called fracture German, which is of that period. And we were lucky enough to have a doctor that was working at our university that was specialized in that kind of language, so that he could actually explain the text to us, because that was really important for the student that was studying history of chemistry. And the student actually wrote his master thesis on that book and the process of recreating that idea of a distillation lab through the drawings of a book from 1569. So that's the environment that we created. We created actually 2 different versions, one for Oculus and one that was stereo in the way, but you didn't have to have glasses on. And we invited the students to come and play. When you put on the Oculus glasses, that's what you see. You find yourself inside the lab, and you can actually work with putting all of that stuff around into place, so that you can continue with the experiment and at the end get the experiment done. After we did that, we proceeded to a different idea, and that was to take another book and create an information landscape environment, which is also a virtual reality environment, but a little bit different than the Oculus and the cave experience. And that was with a manuscript from 1670 of a young man that rode his horse together with his brother around Europe. That period, that was the way that young nobility, young nobles would gain education. They would go from one museum to the other, they would visit one place after the other to see those places, and they always had a mentor with them, a kind of a teacher that would accompany them. and these two young boys, they were 18 and 17 years old, they went all around the known Europe of the time. And Lilienthal, and as his name was, he had this manuscript where he illustrated with paintings whatever he saw, and he wrote down his experiences. So since we were working with Pisa, we took that part and we used the 3D models of the known monuments of Pisa and took the book and combined it with a map, an interactive map, where you can actually walk into the Pisa of that period, and you have pictures, you have the texts from the book that it's telling you what he saw, and you can actually immerse yourself into the book. Here it's a bit blurry because she works a head-mounted device, so she sees it clearly, you cannot, but you can see how she goes around in the cave and how she explores the space of the map, the interactive map of Pisa, but in that period as it is described by the writer of the book. So that was another project that we did, and all of that was presented for both students and for colleagues to get feedback along the way, but also at the end. We had several shows and we still use it. It's free to download through our site. But it has been a very long process, very expensive, and it has created a lot of challenges for our sector and the way we think about the future. What became very clear from the beginning is that even though children are the most difficult, let's say, public to satisfy, they are also the most interesting ones, because they're the ones to give you directly feedback, whether they like it or not, and why. Grown-ups have a tendency to be a bit more polite. So we need this kind of feedback because it's constructive when someone says, yeah, we liked it, but nobody uses it again, so it's not really a feedback. And that was really interesting with the children. So we created this kind of educational labs and activities where they would go around the library and see the different parts of the library and the museum and realize that these were objects from certain periods and how these periods, how they were represented by the museum. And they would also go through the digital archives and see how they could themselves use them. So that took us over to a new project that is called ARK4. The previous one is called Mubil. And we realized that one of the biggest challenges altogether was how do we create a different how do we create a different way of thinking when it comes to the people visiting us? When we say that we are a library and people come to us, we remain a library. Even though we bring in these virtual reality tools, everybody thinks of us as a library. So what we actually do very often is we take a shelf with books, which is physical, and we recreate that shelf of books in a digital form, in a flat form. Can we really change that? Is that a way of doing it? Another example is what we're doing here. We are recording this lecture, and I cannot move around because I have to be right here in front of the microphone. I cannot use my body. There's a video camera that we could have been using it. I could take it with me and take it to Norway, to Trondheim, to our library, to the students that have been working with us, the experts that have been working with us, and maybe create something that was that could use these mediums. So are we really using the medium that we have in hand? So we invited, except the library itself, some museums in our area that had special challenges, like the Deaf Museum of Trondheim and the State Archives, and we also involved the IT experts and a digital curation unit that is also part of the Daria network in Athens, in Greece. And we created some quizzes that were more direct towards our public, where we used knowledge from the past, but we tried to create it in a playful way. So we had some young artists like my niece here that created the visuals so that we could try to appeal to people in different way, but we also had the records of the library. So here is a game that we created for a touch screen, which uses the visuals from Flora Danica, which is a botanist book from 1800s, and you're supposed to collaborate with that. You're not alone. You play always in team, and there are questions, and there are pictures that you have to move around the touchscreen, and you have to collaborate with each other. It's a team work. And we also presented all of these different projects to the researchers' night to see what was the difference. And we found out that 3D technology catches your eye, but does it really support learning in the way that we wanted to? Because that was the main reason that we worked with that. But the most important challenge of everything was to follow the evolution of technology, because that is really very, very difficult. From the time that we got the money, the external funding for the projects, up to the time that the projects were actually finished, we were already old-fashioned. It was already finished. And it was just what we created around the projects. If we had experts coming in, and if we had students having some kind of question or wanted to participate in a cultural or educational activity that would create the frame for them to come. It was not the virtual reality tools themselves that would bring them there. And as we continued, when it comes to archaeology, there's a lot of new projects already. In the last year, there was a big evolution about what is going on. And we found out that it's very difficult for academics generally, when you work in academia, to follow what the future will bring. At least that's how I feel. So I think there's 3 ways that you might be able to grasp what the future will bring and face those challenges. One is to ask the students, because the students always are the generation ahead, even though some surveys say that the students are not as digitally literate as we believe. They have a totally different relationship to the tool that is called technology. So they always bring new ideas. You ask your colleagues, of course. You create this kind of interdisciplinary projects and participate in that. But it's very important that you evaluate at the end, because evaluation methodology is something that is very difficult in the digital humanities area. And most important of all, which is something that we don't do and we haven't done, is to ask your public. Ask your public, ask the users, the people that come to you. I like very much the work of Eric Champion that works with virtual reality tools in archaeology and the past. And he poses all of these questions. how can we actually find out how do users learn through that interaction? Because if the interaction is only to come and see something, that's okay. But do we want them to leave our museum or our library with something, to have learned something? Are we asking them what they learned, on how they learned it? So that's one of the main questions. And that's what we've been trying to do with the second application. We're trying to use these kind of playful game activities and see whether that creates engagement into the past. And we ran some mixed methods. That means we observed the students as they were working. We talked to them while they were working. We videotaped them and analyzed the recordings afterwards. But we also had interviews, which was both group interviews and lone interviews. And the results that you can bring out of a query like this, like the result that we have here, these are questions of knowledge that we asked them before they started the activity and after. And we can see that there is like 1 point. They moved from 4.5 to 5.7 on the knowledge scale. What does that really tell us? Does it tell us much? We also asked them about the activity, how they felt about the activity. And you can see the difference here on the different levels, on the satisfaction, on the intention to participate, the easiness, the enjoyment, the usefulness. Again, the difference is not that big. But when we talk to them, when we actually talk to them, then the results were totally different. A lot of those particular students that participated in that, they told us afterwards, it was boring. We didn't really like it. And we said, yeah, but you were laughing and you seemed engaged. Yeah, but we don't like this kind of stuff. I mean, we did it because you asked us to do it, but it was not interesting. And we still can say that they learned something. The questionnaires say that they learned something, but it was not fun for them. So which is the focus? What will be the focus? So when it comes to the idea of the museums today, I like very much what Nina Simone says. It would be very interesting to have a place where visitors and staff members could actually share their interests and skills with each other, so that the experts are not just experts, but they're also people that can share their expertise in a different way. A place where everybody can meet with their experiences and their attitudes, not just their expertise. And I think that's a very great challenge that we have to meet. So can we manage to create engagement only by using tools? My experience through that was that when we finally got to the end of the projects and we invited people to test them, not only students but also researchers, even the collaborators that were IT people and working with virtual reality tools all the time, they wanted to see the original. The greatest moment for them was when we actually took out the book and they could actually touch and see the original. And they've been working with it 2 years. Thank you. Thank you.